You've seen our research on social media. Now, join us as we dive deeper into the public health topics of our time, featuring new studies and findings generated by our faculty and researchers committed to advancing health equity. From the Department of Population and Public Health Sciences at Keck School of Medicine of USC, this is Preventive Pros, the podcast.
My name is Mihtar. I'm a sophomore studying global health, and I have minors in natural science and cinema television.
Hi, I'm Tang. I'm a junior at USC. I'm studying global health and I'm also minoring in data science. I'm also a PDP student and I'm pursuing MS in public health data science. And I am a student researcher in Grit Lab, which is run by Dr. Whipley.
So I joined Grit Lab in the fall semester of my sophomore year, so fall 23. Nicole, when did you join Grit Lab?
I joined Grit in the spring semester of my sophomore year.
So today we're going to be talking about the Grit Lab's trip to Kenya over spring break in spring 24. And we went there to implement a youth public health ambassador training program. So essentially we had kind of like a summer camp style of workshops and rotations. And we taught people about nutrition and sexual hygiene and menstrual health and a lot of prominent global and public health issues that we wanted to address. And those young girls that we talked to are going to go into their communities and teach their communities about what they learned in the YPHA or Youth Public Health Ambassador Training Program.
So previously, Dr. Whipley and Grit Lab had implemented a YPHA programming in Uganda, but this is the first time that Grit has come to Kenya to implement YPHA workshopping.
So I joined the Grit Lab because I actually met Dr. Whitley in a Keck student ambassador event my freshman year, and I just fell in love with what she had to say about global health and her passion for the field. And so I just emailed her and I asked her if I could join her lab, and that was, I mean, really, I fell in love with Dr. Whitley and her passion for it. And the lab has been everything that I've expected and everything that I wanted out of it. And it just really emphasizes and highlights my passion for global health. And it gives me an outlet to kind of explore the research behind that and the implementation behind what I'm learning in my classes. Nicole, why'd you join Grit Lab?
Yeah, so similar to you, it's because I met Dr. Whipley. I took HP 365 with her and she mentioned it briefly. And I, going into like global health and going into that space, I knew I didn't necessarily want to be on the medical side. I didn't really know what that meant for me. And eventually it led me to data science. But meeting her and her background as someone in the realm of global health, but with an IR background as well, I was like, oh, this is like another pathway for me. And this is something that I could be involved in. And I've had previous experience doing like community-based public and global health, like education and advocacy. So a lot of what Grit Lab did with just going out into the community, but then also, doing advocacy and education. Also, they have like a bit of like a research data science component to the youth public health ambassador workshopping. So I was really interested in that as well. So I decided to join and something I wanted to get a part of. And I'm really glad that I've been able to be a part of it, like on campus and writing up the papers, but also being able to go to Kenya with the lab. So Rizan, when did you hear about Grit going to Kenya and what kind of drew you into wanting to be a part of this trip?
So I first heard about the trip, I think, fall 23, so last semester, kind of at the tail end of it, because there was another trip to Uganda that had happened for winter or Thanksgiving break sometime in fall 23, and I wasn't able to go to that one. And Kira, the research assistant for the lab, she started talking about a spring break trip to Kenya to implement the YPHA program. And so that was, I think, the first time that any of us had really heard about it. And I was immediately intrigued, but it's obviously a very big commitment. And I didn't know what my mom might want me to do during spring break because I still am under her coattails, unfortunately. But so I definitely was interested from the beginning, but it was something that I had to kind of get a lot of information about. And so it kind of all just happened really suddenly. And I decided I wanted to go just because I wanted to see like the implementation behind the research that we're doing kind of behind the scenes. And I've heard so much about all the great trips to Uganda, and I knew that Kenya was the first time. It was the lab's first time going to Kenya. So I thought it would be a really cool opportunity for me to go because I don't have a lot of experience. And so I didn't want to kind of go into it with a super established plan. And so we were all kind of learning along the way and we kind of had to start from scratch. So that was one of the main reasons I wanted to go on the trip. How about you, Nicole?
Yeah, so I heard about it when they brought it up in one of the lab meetings, and these trips is like they're a big part of grit. Being able to interact with people face to face and connect with all the community members and the partners that they have, like either in Uganda or Kenya. So this is like a very big component of the lab. So it's something I wanted to be a part of, and I think it was a really great opportunity and a really great experience. Yeah, so that's why I wanted to join.
So, just to give a little bit more context for the trip, we left LAX on Saturday and it took 25 hours of travel. So, it was a long flight. We had two flights. And once we got to Nairobi, we stayed in our hotel, which was only a 15-minute drive from Project Elamu, which is in Kibra. Kenya, and so Kibra is the largest slum in Africa and one of the largest slums in the whole world. So it was really eye-opening to see that. Nicole, what were your first impressions when we got to Nairobi?
Well, one of my first impressions was when we met Mike out of the airport. Friendliest dude ever. So Mike is the man behind Project LMU. So he picked us up at the airport and immediately started chatting, and that's when I knew like the week was going to go well because of like I mean he's the person behind Project LMU, so I was really excited for what the week had in store. And then I guess it was also 3 in the morning or something crazy. So that was I was another impression was that my body did not know what time it was, and it was kind of confusing. Um, but yeah, and then in terms of Kibra specifically, the first day we went to go see Project Elamu. First impressions on the ride over, the roads are not paved. They are just kind of there, so quite rocky. Can get a little car sick. And then going into Project Elamu, I guess first impressions meeting the girls, they're the friendliest people ever. I they're just so welcoming and immediately hugs, like, let me hold your hand while we walk around. They just like want to talk to you, get to know you, and they want to like share their lives with you as well. So Project Element was started by a man named Mike. So Mike is a Kenyan, but he's also a trained professional ballet dancer who spent some time in Europe, and then he came back to Africa, and he wanted to be able to share ballet with these with young kids in Kibra. So he opened up Project Elamu, and now they do more than just like ballet classes, but they have skateboarding classes as well. They have some computers in the back, but it's just a community space for kids to come to, when they're not at school or they don't want to be at home. And it's just like a community safe space with fun things for them to do. And for the week, the girls that were part of our YPHA program were young mothers aged 18 to like 23, 24-ish. And Mike is a big person in the community. He knows every single person. And if he doesn't know that person yet, you're going to go watch him introduce himself to that person. And so he was the one who was able to recruit all these young mothers to be a part of our programming. Yeah.
So the first day that we got to Nairobi, we just got to meet the girls, and I think it was, even though there weren't really any workshops or we didn't do a lot of like the curriculum, it was probably the most important day because we just got to dance with them and they taught us a lot of dancing, which was so much fun. And that was definitely the day that I kind of bonded with the girls the most, I think, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of the trip because I think there is that level and that trust that needs to be built before you can start talking about these really personal topics. And so then throughout the week we had like nutrition, like a nutrition curriculum, and the girls actually taught us how to make chapati, which is one of their like a really common dish that they serve. And Nicole and I were actually in charge of that station, and there were like physical fruits that we would ask, like, is this a carbohydrate or a grain or a vegetable? And they would place it on the plate. And so it was a really interactive way for them to learn about these things without us having to lecture and without them having to listen too much. And there was also a lot of discussion-based workshops that we had. So there would be like three groups of just like three circles that were formed. And like we taught them how to conduct research and what research means and why we do research and how we collect data. And that one was really cool because they actually got to go out into their communities and ask people to fill out this survey. And then we collected all of the forms that they had and analyzed it and gave them like the mean age and like the proportion of gender and stuff like that. So it was really cool to watch that take flight. And then we got into more personal and kind of touchy subjects like sexual abuse and toxic relationships, which is something that a lot of girls in this community unfortunately face. And so it was something that we had to handle with a lot of care and a lot of delicacy. And so just kind of giving them the right resources of who they can turn to if something like that were to happen, God forbid. Yeah, Nicole, is there anything that you want to add?
The first half of the week we did basic like public health topics. Like we talked about, we did nutrition and like sanitation. There was like a little bit of a CPR workshop going as well. But then the second latter half of the week was going over like research methods and what informed consent is, and having them do like this mock nutrition survey that Razan mentioned, so they could practice data collection, because ultimately like our lab's goal is to be able to have an official study going on, and they're going to be our data collectors, and they're also going to be like our result presenters. So part of the training was just not like the education portion, but also like giving them these skills behind like research and data collection. And like we had them mock present, like if they were going to talk to a politician or to like a community leader, so that, you know, there's a sense of like longevity and like ultimate outcome, other than just like education. So, Roseanne, was there anything that stood out to you or surprised you, or any big takeaways you had from the week?
Well, one major thing that I picked up on was this sense of community that they had. And it was something I've honestly never seen before. And so when we were going out and conducting the research, we went out with them and we like helped them with the survey and like approaching people. And sometimes they would walk into a shop and like make conversation with like the shop owner and then like ask them for the survey. And then we would leave and I would ask, like, how do you know them? And then she would be like, oh, I just met her. And I was like, that's so crazy because they talk like they've known each other forever. And so that was a really, really big thing. And it also extended to us, like to Grit Lab. And like Nicole said earlier, like they just welcomed us with literally open arms and like gave us hugs right away and like very affectionate people. And they were super, super sweet. Is there anything that you want to add, Nicole?
I guess going into it, I didn't really know, again, like what the personal interactions were, but at the end of the day, these girls are like our own age, so they're our friends. Like even though like we went in and we're like not really sure what's happening, at the end of the day, I feel like I walked out with a lot of friends. You know, we took so many pictures together, we played a lot of games together, we danced, we played soccer. We just like walked around and talked, and like they wanted to hear about our lives and what it's like going to college here. And one of the girls like also asked me like what it's like to be Asian American in America, or Asian American in the US, and just having like these conversations with them and like our goals and our dreams and ambitions. But just like talking to them, because at the end of the day, like they were our peers and like they're our friends now, and we still keep in contact, you know. So I think we made a lot of good relationships and a lot of good friendships out of it. So the surveys that we collected, or the surveys that we had them do, they were like more mock surveys just so that they could practice going out into the community, being like, hey, I'm a community researcher, I am a youth public health ambassador, and you know, let me explain to you the small survey that we're doing. But ultimately, like those surveys weren't really collected for the sake of like having data from it. Just because there was like didn't go through any like official channels to like put that out there, but it was mainly for them to be able to practice gaining those skills of telling people like, I'm a community researcher, let me get your consent, let me explain to you what I'm doing. So that was the main purpose of those surveys. Well, I think anybody who, you know, has to go out into the community and just walk up to a random stranger, it's very daunting. And I think you could tell that the girls were nervous, but I think at the end of, you know, their 3 surveys, they came back and they were like, wow, that actually was not as scary or daunting as I thought that was going to be. So I think just like those skills of like being able to have conversation with people in the community, just practice walking up to people and explaining them, you know, the repetition of like, by the time you get that to that 3rd survey, you're like, okay, like I have this down a little bit better now. So I think that walking away with that confidence and just being like, okay, like I can do this. I think that was really important. Roseanne, do you have any thoughts?
I totally agree. And also, I think that the future of research lies in showing people how to conduct research rather than conducting research ourselves. Like for example, in Kenya, like the unfortunately parachute research is a really like prominent issue right now where researchers from like the United States to the global north in general just kind of go into these countries in the global south and like conduct research and then leave. And so I think like that doesn't really like help on like a very practical level. Like yes, you've gotten your data, but at the end of the day, like what is that doing for the community? And so I think that the future of research really does lie in showing people how they can conduct their own research so that these communities can identify problems within like that a lot of people experience, and then they can take the steps that they want to conduct that research and then present their findings to like legislation to like enact legislation and make real profound change within their own communities.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Dr. Whipley has done really well with Uganda and now the Kenya YPHA training is really like it's very much is a two-sided conversation, us and them, and like we're learning from them, and they're learning from us too. And I know like at the end of the week we had like an open forum of like, hey, like takeaways from the week, and one of the girls said like, thank you for teaching us like research methods, including us in the actual like research part because they've had people come in and they just use them for data. But I think what's really great about Dr. Whitley's programming setup is that it really is incorporating them in like to be a part of the research, and it'll like equip them and give them like skills later on and moving forward. So on our last day, it was a or my last day because Roseanne left a day earlier, but my last day was a Saturday. So that's when all the kids actually come to Project Eleanor because they don't have school on that day. So we danced a lot with the kids, played soccer. We watched them have a ballet lesson. Dr. Whipley brought over like 20 pairs of or point shoes. And then we also saw them have a skateboarding lesson at one of the nearby schools. So the last day was more fun just hanging out with the kids and seeing what Project Element was really all about.
So like Nicole said, I left a day earlier. So I left on Friday. And then the day before on Thursday, we woke up at some absurd hour. I think it was like 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. But it was so worth it because we got to go on this amazing safari. And just these animals that I'd really only seen like on the internet, like were right in front of me. Like we saw a pride of lions, and it was so cool to see like all the female lions and then like the one male lion because that's something that like you hear about a lot. And so just seeing that was super cool. Or like giraffes are so tall. Like I did not realize how tall they are, but they are massive. Um, and so that was definitely another highlight.
So part of while we were there was sitting down and having a conversation with them, like and asking them about what are issues in the community that they really care about and they wanted to focus on. And it was an overwhelming, they wanted to focus on like teen pregnancy, gender-based violence, and risk factors. So moving forward, Dr. Whitley, I know, was able to make connections with University of Nairobi's their medical school dean, I believe. And so now our lab, as well as University of Nairobi, going to write up research methods and IRB, and submit to IRB so that we can get like an official study going. And our newly trained youth public health ambassadors are going to be our data collectors, and then we'll be able to go from there. So, Roseanne, what advice would you have for someone who is interested in any future trips and is asking you questions about it?
Yes, there are definitely many future trips. I know that Dr. Whitley and Kira, the RA, they go on like a few trips a year. And I think they're going to Uganda this summer. And so if you're interested in something so soon or even something like later on, I would say join the lab first of all, meet Dr. Whitley, meet Kira. Because I think it would be a lot to just go on a trip without having any of the knowledge behind what you're doing there. But I think that there is an internship this summer, which I think would be a lot more. I think it's also open to people not in the lab. But I still would recommend if you're interested in global health and the research and implementation behind that to join Grit Lab because it is a great experience. It's something I've learned a lot from. And this trip was just another example of that. And it's just one of the amazing experiences that I've had in the lab. Nicole, is there anything that you learned from this trip that you wouldn't have gotten in another setting or that only this trip to Kenya could have given you?
Yeah, I think one of like the large takeaways was like the importance of building like real relationships and connections, whether it's just like with Mike at Project Elmer or with the girls who are part of our programming, and that, I think forming these real connections will like light a fire under us to be really invested in the rest of like the paper writing and anything with this research moving forward. But I mean, on both ends, like these relationships are really valuable for any future trips in programming. And I think part of the summer, I think Dr. Whiffley and Kira are hoping to go back to Kenya this summer also to check in with them and see how everything's going before going back to Uganda for the drowning prevention workshopping.
Nicole, what other projects have you worked on in Grit Lab that have really opened your eyes to global health research?
I am working on a road trauma and injury prevention paper at the moment, which would entail research in Uganda, assessing the road infrastructure and assessing like the points of risk for anything road trauma injury related, whether it's just like the state of the vehicles or the state of the roads or the lack of road infrastructure at all, or like period. And I think, we were talking about like today youth public health ambassadors, and I think when this project gets implemented, Dr. Whiffley's hoping to use some of the public health ambassadors that she's trained in Uganda to be able to be a part of this research study. And I know the lab is also doing a lot of stuff with menstrual health right now. So I think they're looking at research revolving period underwear. So yeah. Originally when the project was presented, data collection analysis was a big part of it. And because I'm interested in data science, I was like, okay, this is something very more interdisciplinary that I could be a part of. So I wanted, because I think originally they were just talking about like how like the data from the collection of the roads would be analyzed. I was like, oh, this is something I'm interested in. But I think it also just goes to show that there are so many aspects of global health in general that, maybe off the bat you don't think, oh, I should think about roads and road safety, but it is a very big aspect of global health and public health in general.
To learn more about the work that we do, you can search USC Grit Lab and our page will pop up. And there's also a link on how to contact Dr. Whiffley or Kira, and feel free to join the lab. It's a great time.
Preventive Pros, the podcast, is produced by the Department of Population and Public Health Sciences at Keck School of Medicine of USC. To learn more about any of our episodes, or to subscribe to our monthly Preventive Dose newsletter featuring the latest in public health research and news, visit pphs.usc.edu/podcast. Thank you for listening.